He was born into slavery, and he died a legend whose story still unsettles anyone who hears it. His name in the records was Roque José Florencio, but almost nobody remembers him that way. He is remembered instead by a nickname, Pata Seca. In Portuguese it means dry foot, though the reasons behind it vary. Some say it was because of his unusually thin legs compared to his towering frame, others say it was a mocking reference to how he walked. Whatever the origin, the name stuck, and it is under that name that his story survived long after he was gone. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your loved ones. Thank you. Now, let's dive in. Accounts place his birth around 1828. Some oral histories say he came from Angola, one of the main sources of enslaved Africans sent to Brazil. Others insist he was born on Brazilian soil, on or near the plantations where he would spend much of his life. Either way, his childhood was marked by the same reality that defined millions of lives in Brazil at the time. He was born into bondage, a human being treated as property. What set him apart, and what shaped his fate, was his body. Pata Seca grew into a giant of a man, said to be over 7 feet tall. Local stories describe him as immensely strong, with long arms and a powerful chest. To the enslavers who owned him, that body was not something to respect. It was an opportunity to exploit. Historians explain that by the mid-19th century, when Brazil was importing fewer enslaved Africans, plantation owners became more interested in the reproduction of the people they already held in bondage. Children born to enslaved women were considered the property of the master, and they could be sold, traded, or put to work. In this system, reproduction itself was controlled and commodified. Pata Seca's owner recognized his unusual size and decided to use him not only as a laborer but as a breeder. Oral accounts passed down in São Paulo state say he was forced to sleep with enslaved women again and again, ordered to father as many children as possible. He had no say in this. The women had no say in this. What in any free life would have been an intimate choice was instead an act of violence, a command carried out under the shadow of slavery. The numbers are staggering. Local memory claims he fathered more than 200 children. Some even place the figure at 249. Historians are cautious with such numbers, pointing out that there are no surviving plantation registers that can confirm them. But they also note that in the system of slavery, records of enslaved people's family lives were often ignored or erased. What survives, then, is memory, and in the towns where his story is told, the number of children attributed to him is repeated generation after generation. The women who bore those children had no freedom to refuse. Their bodies were controlled by the master in the same way that their labor was. For them, pregnancy was not a matter of choice but of compulsion, and the children they brought into the world were taken as property. Pata Seca himself was denied the ordinary bonds of family. Even as he produced children by the dozens, he was prevented from being a father in any meaningful sense. He could not raise them, could not protect them, could not decide their futures. He was reduced to a stud, and his children to commodities. Some accounts say his master treated him slightly better than the average field hand, ensuring he had food and conditions to maintain his health. There are suggestions that he was checked for disease, that he was kept strong because he was valuable in this unnatural role. But this was not kindness. It was investment, the way one cares for livestock. Pata Seca's worth, in his owner's eyes, lay in how many more enslaved bodies he could bring into the world. In 1888, Brazil finally abolished slavery with the passing of the Lei Aurea, the Golden Law. It was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to do so. By then, Pata Seca was already 60 years old, a man who had spent his entire life under the system. Freedom came late, but it came. Oral accounts say that after emancipation he was given a small piece of land by his former master. Whether this was generosity or a way of keeping him tied to the estate is hard to say, but it marked a shift. For the first time in his life, he could make decisions that had been denied to him. In freedom, he married a woman named Palmira. With her, he had 9 children, children he could finally recognize as his, children born not out of command but out of family. For a man who had been forced to father hundreds without recognition, those 9 children stand as something profound. They were his not just by blood but by choice, the beginning of a life that had been stolen from him decades earlier. Remarkably, Pata Seca lived to an extraordinary age. Oral tradition holds that he reached 130 years old, dying in 1958. Historians are cautious about this claim, noting that records of birth and death for enslaved people were often unreliable, and ages were easily exaggerated in memory. Still, even if the exact number is uncertain, it is clear he lived an unusually long life, long enough to have witnessed the era of slavery, its abolition, and the Brazil that emerged afterward. The manner of his death is remembered in striking detail. He is said to have stepped on a nail, an ordinary accident that turned fatal when infection set in. After surviving the brutality of slavery, the endless labor, the forced breeding, and the passage of more than a century, his life ended from something as simple as an infected wound. Today, the legacy of Pata Seca lives on in the region of Santa Eudoxia and São Carlos. Many families there claim descent from him. Some estimates suggest that a third of the population may carry his blood. Whether that figure is exact or not, it speaks to how widely his story has spread, and how deeply it has shaped local identity. His descendants live ordinary lives, but when they trace their ancestry, they find themselves connected to a man who was denied the ordinary dignity of family yet became the patriarch of hundreds. The details of his life blur between fact and folklore. Was he truly 7 feet tall? Did he truly father more than 200 children? Did he truly live to 130? Historians point out that such details often grow in the retelling. Height becomes taller, numbers become larger, years become longer. But myths do not grow from nothing. They grow from truths that are too painful or too extraordinary to be forgotten. And at the heart of Pata Seca's story is a truth that no exaggeration can obscure. Under slavery, human beings were treated as property, their bodies controlled, their families broken. The details of his life blur between fact and folklore. Was he truly 7 feet tall? Did he truly father more than 200 children? Did he truly live to 130? Historians point out that such details often grow in the retelling. Height becomes taller, numbers become larger, years become longer. But myths do not grow from nothing. They grow from truths that are too painful or too extraordinary to be forgotten. And at the heart of Pata Seca's story is a truth that no exaggeration can obscure. Under slavery, human beings were treated as property, their bodies controlled, their families broken. His story matters because it forces us to confront aspects of slavery that are often left unspoken. We think of chains, of whips, of fields of sugar and coffee. But slavery also reached into the most intimate parts of life. It controlled who could marry, who could love, who could have children, and under what circumstances. It turned reproduction into an economic strategy. In Pata Seca's life, we see how far that system went. And yet, his story is not only one of exploitation. It is also one of endurance. He lived through it. He survived to see freedom. He built a family in freedom. And even if his life was shaped by forces beyond his control, his memory outlived his master's. His descendants remember him. His name continues to be spoken. His story continues to be told. The historian's task is to separate what is certain from what is legendary, but the storyteller's task is to preserve meaning. And the meaning of Pata Seca's story is clear. It tells us about the cruelty of slavery, the resilience of those who endured it, and the complicated ways memory keeps the past alive. When we hear that he fathered more than 200 children, we hear not just a number but the echo of a system that saw human lives as wealth. When we hear that he lived to 130, we hear the echo of resilience, the desire to believe that a man who endured so much could also outlast his oppressors. When we hear that he died from a nail in his foot, we hear the echo of how fragile human life always is, no matter how legendary. Pata Seca's story is not just the story of one man. It is the story of slavery in Brazil, of how it shaped families, communities, and legacies that persist into the present. It is the story of how memory preserves pain and transforms it into identity. And it is the story of how even in the darkest circumstances, humanity endures. To tell his story is not to celebrate it. It is to remember the violence that shaped it, to acknowledge the suffering behind it, and to honor the humanity that survived it. Pata Seca did not choose the role he was forced into. But by remembering him, we choose to face the reality of what was done, and to ensure it is not forgotten. In the end, his life raises questions we cannot ignore. How do we measure the legacy of a man who fathered hundreds of children under compulsion? How do we honor the women whose choices were denied, whose bodies were used? How do we reckon with a system that sought to erase humanity yet could never fully succeed? The answers are not simple. But the act of asking them keeps the memory alive. Pata Seca's story, whether in its factual details or its legendary proportions, is a reminder of what slavery was, what it did, and why its memory still matters. And as we close his story, we are left with a reflection. History is not only written in books or carved in monuments. It is carried in the names whispered from one generation to the next, in the faces of descendants, in the stories that refuse to fade. Pata Seca lives on in memory not because he wanted to, but because forgetting him would mean forgetting what slavery really was. To remember him is to remember the truth, and to carry it forward.